Okay, everybody, welcome today to the fourth and final for this term talk dealing with artificial intelligence, sponsored by the Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning. Today we have with us Dr. Dona Warren. Dr. Warren originally did her undergraduate in mathematics at Morehead College. From there, she went to the University of Minnesota, where she got her master's degree and her Ph.D. in philosophy. And she joined the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point team shortly thereafter, immediately around 1995.
Yep.
In her time here, she's obviously been a very prominent member of our community. If you want to see what's going on, look at what Dona is doing, because you will see for sure where she is. She is currently the director of the Critical Thinking Center here on campus. She's an assistant dean for curriculum and student
No longer.
No longer.
All of that has been shifted. So when I stopped in that, I
was the assistant for student something and curriculum in college. And she formerly was the chair of the Department of Philosophy. So she's had a lot of hats here. And today she's going to talk to us a little bit about critical thinking and artificial intelligence. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm happy to see people here who are going to be getting called out later on. So you never know, it could be you. So yeah, it's hard to believe that about last year at this time, I don't know if I've heard the words ChatGTP. I'm just curious, had you heard this last year at this time? Last year you just started? Maybe. It was just started. If I've heard it, it was just, I don't think I have. So things are happening quickly, and here we are, right? Vera, in a kind of an amazing act of like prognostication, last year had a great series on when robots rule the world, but it seemed like uncanny foresight when ChatGPT came out and all of these other things, just kind of uncanny. And things have continued to evolve super fast. Right now, if you haven't checked any of these resources out there, I'm sure there's more than this. There are AI tool directories. And, so if you're just curious, you can sort them by type. And I'm sure that new ones are being added. This one, I can't remember when I took that screenshot, but just today, right? 8 tools have been added to Futurepedia. And I'm sure that the tools that are there are improving hourly. So this is a fast moving issue, right? A very fast moving area. For that reason, I have like no interest in anything that's not future proof here. A lot of the conversation that I've heard earlier, it's starting to die down a little bit about what does this mean for you when you're teaching, struck me as very, very time bound. That things that would not be relevant 30 minutes in the future. I mean, it's really, really not future proof. Among them are these. Prompt engineering. There were courses, and there presumably still are courses, on how to engineer prompts. Now, I might be mistaken. I'm sure there will always be room for engineering prompts really, really well. But I'm reminded of when I first started, like in 1995, the chair of the department at that time was hunting for someone to take over the webpage. And he said, I don't know why, to me, would you be interested in learning HTML to do the webpage? And I laughed. I said, no. For one thing, I was just trying to keep my head above water, just teaching. And also I thought, I might do a webpage someday, but it will not be with HTML. That I predict that there will be tools that will allow me to put together the kind of web page I need without HTML. And sure enough, I was right. I think the same kind of thing will happen with prompt engineering. This you've probably heard, fact checking, particularly in my area of critical thinking. Maybe 6 months ago, all the rage was critical thinking will become all the more important because students will need to fact check what ChatGPT says because ChatGPT hallucinates. And I thought, now And maybe it always will, but I would be surprised. I would expect the reliability of the information that we get from these tools to improve. And it will need no more fact checking than anything else does on the web, which certainly you need some, right? But you don't expect wholesale just falsehoods like sometimes you can get from ChatGPT to this day, I think. I have gotten that. This is a little trickier. There's been much talk about the approaches to biased training data. These results are biased because the training data is what's currently on the web. So if you ask for images, like a while ago, yesterday, I was trying to get an image for use in this talk, and what I wanted. So I was going on Bing, and I was doing Bing image generator, which if you have not done yet, you should do. It is fun. It is fun. Yes, it is fun. You will see some results from Bing image generator later on today. It's just fun to play with. I wanted an image of some college professors sitting around talking with a robot. So I wrote that in, college professors sitting around talking with a robot. And I got like doctors, people in lab coats with stethoscopes. And of course, I had asked, knowing that I would probably get white men, I did say include women and people of color. So I got women and people of color in lab coats. Then I said, not doctors, right? And they still popped up as so somehow the training data has Bing image generator thinking that college professors and doctors are kind of the same. There's a bias there. That might not exist next week, for all I know. So I'm not interested in that. So then what do I think is interesting? This I think is interesting. These questions of the purpose of education, the questions of knowledge, the question of meaning. I think those are perennial and they are very much future proof. So that's kind of what I want to focus. They are also rather existential. So some of the first, of course, as you know, the first worry was, how on earth are we going to assess, right? How on earth are we going to assess? Given generative AI's ability to do the things that we usually ask the students to do, to know what they know, won't everybody cheat all the time? And so then how on earth can we possibly assess students, which we need to do? Closely related to that is if ChatGTP or other kind of generative AI can do the things that we've historically trained students to do, why are we training students to do it, right? Think about all the time back in the early days of like maybe the 1900s when it was so much more memorization, right? I think. Yeah, you had to memorize the state capitals. You had to memorize all of this stuff. We don't anymore. Why? Well, because we can find that out instantly. So now what can AI do? Make images. It can write papers. It can put together computer programs. What will it be able to do next year? Heaven only knows. So then why on earth are we offering courses to teach students to do that stuff? Is that just the equivalent of asking them to memorize all the state capitals? Even worse, maybe, why should they need to learn it? Why should anyone take any course to learn anything if everything can eventually be done by AI? I think that's a serious question. I think there are good answers, but I think that's a reasonable question. And then related to that, if AI can teach better than we can, what are we doing? Right? Will we be just kind of taught out of a job by AI? Now, I think that there are, as I said, responses to these. For instance, we've already talked about this, we being the collective we on campus and beyond. We can certainly change our assessment methods. I think we can do that. I think maybe we should. I think maybe AI will help us to do that in ways that are actually for the better in terms of student learning. We can certainly change our learning outcomes, as we've done with no longer do you need to memorize state capitals. What about this? mean, this is more futuristic. But I maintain that no, because I think people always want to learn. I think it's part of how we're built. So I don't see a future in which nobody wants to learn anything anymore ever happen. And I think that we will always want to learn from each other. Now, what that looks like might change. And that's much more distancy. But those are the things I want to talk about a little bit today. Now, of course, if I were guided entirely by a backward course design framework, I would start there and say, let's think about the learning outcomes, and we'll talk about how we can assess them. But that presupposes that we're not already on the horse. We're teaching courses now. So I want to talk about this just really, really briefly, because I don't have anything I think new to offer here. What I have done is been collecting what I think are really good ideas that I just kind of want to share with you. And also, I suppose if we weren't already on the horse, we might think, well, when we think about what our learning outcomes should be, maybe we should think about why people want to learn, and maybe that can affect what you want to teach. And maybe also, if learning is interpersonal, that might also feed into what learning outcomes could be. So I think, again, if we were not actively teaching and learning, the order to think about these things would be that. But I'm not going to talk about them in that order. I'm going to talk assessments, outcomes, human desire, and then interpersonal. And I want to spend most of our time together here, I think. So, and by the way, please, if you feel like there's anything you want to add or a question, let me know, right? Because I have no idea how long this would take me, but I can tell you, I'm going to stop at 5. So if there's an issue that you want to talk about and we don't get through all the PowerPoints, well, I think the world will continue to turn, right? And if you want to get the rest of it, we can see it. But otherwise, I'm just going to hop off it. So if you want to talk, just let me know. And also, if there's anyone on the Zoom who says, excellent. Cool. So let's think about assessment. Again, this is just what I've gathered. So I think of myself as kind of like a crow here. I just kind of picked up shiny objects and I'm just going to show them to you and say, here's kind of what I've learned that might be useful. One is that we can do more stuff live in class. What would that be? Well, here are some, like retrieval practice, just asking students at the beginning, what do you know? It's really good for content knowledge. Actually watch students doing the thing we want them to do. Invite them to summarize what they've learned. Ask them to identify and correct an error. I like doing that, particularly when I teach logic or anything. I just like to do a little proof, have an error, say what's wrong. Right? How wrong is it? And then replace papers maybe with presentations, stuff they actually have to do. We can add specificity to assessment prompts. And this is why I'm very happy you're here, Rebecca. I love this idea. and if anyone wants to ask her about this, I encourage it. But as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, you have assignment prompts that ask students to actually respond or discuss something that another student said in class. I mean, how great is that? How many boxes does that tick? It encourages people to pay attention to what their colleagues are saying. This is AI proof, as far as I can see, forever. Unless, could AI be listening to us? Yeah, sure. But, for all practical purposes. Asking students to build on or apply the content that's covered in a particular lecture or a particular class reading. In general, the less general, the better, right? The more specific to your course. And asking students to apply the content from class to their own lived experience or recent events. Again, something's more immediate. Focus on process over product. This was kind of the first thing that occurred to me when people were bemoaning the demise of like a 5-paragraph essay. I shouldn't say this, especially with an English professor in the room. But I said, no more 5-paragraph essay. You don't do that, do you? I don't think so.
And process has been part of composition theory for 20
Exactly. Exactly. Because I know the sort of, I've seen the people coming in for for paper conferences and stuff. And so I thought, yes, exactly. This seems like an altogether salubrious change. What we can do is assign scaffolded work like they do in the English department. Like many people do, where you first do this, come talk, first, then do this, come talk, rather than just say, spit out an essay. Right? It seems much better from a pedagogical point of view. Allow transparent AI use. And in some talks that I've been to, these are kind of a nice distinction. I've not done this, but it has been recommended to specify whether it's AI assistance or AI generation that you allow. And then require students to submit prompts, outputs, and modifications, knowing how much of that is their own. So just be upfront. You can use it, and here's how. And then, of course, ensure that assessment is aligned to outcomes, right? Backward course design. So let's take a look at outcomes. But before we do, thoughts or questions? This is obviously non-comprehensive. These are just the shiniest bits that I've picked up this semester. So outcomes. This is where I think there's a lot of interesting things to be said. So I'm starting off with the stuff that I think is probably least interesting, at least to me. I think there will be skills that will be required by AI usage, I know this for sure, that are not specifically temporal, right? They are more future-proof. Like, if possible, just being aware that deepfakes exist. And that kind of healthy skepticism without maybe letting it corrupt everyone's understanding of what's out there. Determining when and how to use AI, how to practice effective cognitive offloading. I think that notion of cognitive offloading might be a nice one to give students. Because as soon as somebody said it, I know it's shaped how I think. You know, oh, this is cognitive offloading. And this isn't. Cognitive offloading is exactly what it sounds like. Just having something else do some thinking for you. It could be as simple as making a shopping list or using generative AI to generate a list. Knowing what information to seek, what tests to run, that information literacy, asking good questions, which I think goes beyond prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is too narrow, but asking good questions is a perennially important skill. And that's kind of neat. And then also evaluating, modifying, and implementing AI generated content. So having AI give you something and then tweak it. I anticipate that is already, I mean, I've done that. I'm just curious, how many have already done this? You've gotten some content from AI and you've tweaked it and used it in some way. Yeah, I certainly have. Yeah, absolutely. Pardon me?
Oh, I was joking that I tried to make it write the department review.
Oh, gosh. Oh, that would be wonderful. That would be so wonderful. Metacognition. This is a little bit more interesting to me. It allows us to focus on metacognition, helping students and in fact helping ourselves to think about thinking a little bit. So here is where I started to feel my heart go pity pat. I like thinking about this stuff. So here are some different things that I thought about in this context. First context is distinguishing between different kinds of knowledge. Now, I wish I had put these in a different order. So I'm going to talk about them in a different order. One useful distinction that I've used in my own metacognition that I think we could talk to students about is the difference between schema and elements of theory and data, right? Just those different sorts of things and different ways to approach them. Schema are just organizing frameworks. Data are the things you organize with the frameworks. So you can have like argumentation schema is the one that I think about a lot. An argument is not a list of sentences with a conclusion. An argument is a list of claims that work together in particular ways. And unless we have a clear sense of what those ways are, we're going to read arguments as if they're shopping lists and we will not understand the connections, right? So a lot of it is talking about what those schemas are. Theory and data, that's a common distinction that crosses disciplines in I think a fascinating way. People teach theory and data in every discipline that I've encountered here on campus. And I think there are similar problems, similar challenges in teaching that. So I think there's a lot to be said there. I really love this distinction. I really love this argument. the distinction between consensus building disciplines, like the natural sciences, mathematics and so on, and non-consensus building disciplines like the humanities, my current home discipline and philosophy. And the idea is in consensus building disciplines, and of course, this is an oversimplification, right? In consensus building disciplines, well, they try to build consensus. It's the idea is you subject things to peer review, and then we know a little bit more about biology, and this knowledge kind of grows. And of course, every now and then there's paradigm shifts, but still you build upon what other people do because you're consistently building consensus in the discipline. That tends not to happen in philosophy. It's not like we can say, okay, God's existence, that's been settled. Now we can go on. That's not the way that operates. So what Ward Jones says is both of those disciplines can help people to cultivate the intellectual virtues of confidence and humility, but in interestingly different ways. In consensus building disciplines, you get the confidence, well, because you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? But you have to have the humility because you're probably not going to internalize all of the justifications for every piece of knowledge that you have. In non-consensus building disciplines, if you know something, you know the justification, right? I mean, you kind of own it. It's yours. But because it's not consensus building, you know that other people are going to come at you. And you're not going to have that kind of feeling that I have uncovered the truth because everyone agrees with me. It's not going to happen. It's just a useful distinction that can be helpful. Related to that, this is why I wish I had organized these differently. The fact versus opinion distinction, which I wish I could eradicate all the time. At least helping people to think about that distinction in a little bit more nuanced way, right? The short version is fact is often identified as things that we know empirically and we all agree on. Opinion is everything else. Well, that means that opinion is too broad a notion to be useful. It includes things like unprovoked murder is wrong. Pecan pie is more delicious than apple pie. And unknown historical facts. Cleopatra ate rice for her birthday when she turned 11, right? No one could know these things. I wouldn't want to call it an opinion. It's a fact, right? But this notion of opinion is just very mushy and not useful. But people tend to rely on it, I think, in not helpful ways for public discourse. We can help people to think about the difference between first person knowing and third person knowing. I know about X versus I know that somebody else knows about X. It's a useful distinction. Both of those kinds of knowing are important, but first person knowing has to be primary because no, it's in here. I know that. There's always a first person component in any knowing. So I think that when we talk about AI, when we talk about knowledge, we want to use that as a lever to kind of help people and ourselves to think about what knowledge is like. These are some useful distinctions, perhaps. How would we engage AI in a question here? Like physics versus philosophy, consensus building, non-consensus building. What does that have to do with how we use AI? This for sure, right? Another kind of metacognitive facet that I think is interesting is identifying various things, like identifying what you know and understand versus what you don't know or understand. That's useful. How do you know that? How do you acquire knowledge? How do you relate what you know to other things you know? How do you apply what you know to other contexts? What are you assuming? And how are you reasoning from those assumptions? All of those questions are questions that maybe we can focus on to whatever extent we pivot into more metacognitive learning outcomes. And I think they're useful. Assessing clarity of the concepts and the cogency of the reasoning, right? How clearly are you thinking here? How do you know how clearly you're thinking? Because sometimes things can seem clear in one's head, and then as soon as you try to explain it, it's not so clear, right? So how do you know that? Another thing we can focus on are values and dispositions. Again, the common theme here is, what can we focus on in a world of AI that will always be there to focus on, I think, right? Certainly ethical commitments, kind of first person knowing, being clear about that, taking that seriously, not relegating it to the hinterland of opinion, where it's just everybody's opinion is as good as everybody else. Really helping people to realize, no, there are rules to thinking about ethics. You can do it better or worse. It might not be a consensus building discipline, but you do have some kind of first person knowledge ownership of the ethical views. And then valuing and developing things like curiosity, fair-mindedness. Vera has done great work on the critical thinking dispositions, right? All those critical thinking dispositional elements, which then relate to interpersonal skills. Interpersonal skills will always exist. I don't think they're ever going to get less important. They're probably going to get more important in the world of AI, and especially productive dialogue, right? How can we have productive dialogue?
I'm screwed.
Huh?
I'm screwed.
You're screwed? Oh, that. Yeah. Here to be understanding, learning from, responding to alternative points of view, that kind of thing, right? And then this concept. Anchoring our outcomes to epistemic authenticity. Now, epistemic authenticity is a concept that emerged in a conversation that I was having with somebody last month. And I thought, that's kind of a neat concept. I'm going to Google it, see if I haven't been able to find anything about it. So this is fresh. This is just a concept that emerged from a conversation, and I find it useful. So I'm offering it to you to see if you find it useful too. And if you find it useful, there might be a paper here somewhere. I don't know. Let's define knowledge as epistemically authentic if it meets the following 4 conditions. The knower pursues it voluntarily, right? Why? Well, because the content of the knowledge fulfills an intrinsic purpose of knowing. I'm going to say that again. The content of the knowledge fulfills an intrinsic purpose of knowing. As human beings, we know things for reasons. We want to know things for reasons. What are some of those reasons? Well, one of the reasons I think is enhancing agency. We want to know things so we can do things. I think this is particularly true of little kids, right? Why do little kids learn to walk? Because they want to do things. Self-expression. Why do little kids learn to talk? Because they want to say things. Conferring meaning, understanding how the world works, and then just satisfying curiosity. We want to know things for reasons that are intrinsic to the knowledge itself. Once you acquire the knowledge, it does in fact satisfy one of those intrinsic purposes. I don't think it has to satisfy the purpose for which you are pursuing the knowledge. Maybe I pursue a piece of knowledge just because I'm curious about it. But once I get it, I realize it enhances agency. Right? That's why I used an intrinsic purpose rather than that intrinsic purpose. It just has to slot into some reason why you know things. And then in virtue of serving that purpose, the knowledge is integrated into the system, into the knower system of knowledge, and is practically applied. Good example of that, shout out to Vera. I read this paper, it's fantastic. It's definitely worth reading. And Vera uses machine translation and other things to take, correct me if I'm wrong, to take some of the initial emphasis off of semantic and syntactic perfection when speaking in the target language, right? And onto communicative efficacy. Is that sort of right? Yeah. So the goal is to speak in the target language, in the language that you're learning, in a way that can be understood. And then once people do that, note, that's enabling self-expression, right? That's epistemically authentic. And then once people do that, they are a little bit more interested in the nuances of what's the particular, how should I conjugate this verb in this tense, right? And are there other words that I could use to express this point? So note, a lot of the knowledge, not a lot, but certainly some, and I'm going to pick on my own discipline just because it's my own discipline to pick on. Let's suppose that someone is taking an introduction to philosophy class only to fulfill a gen ed. and because the course that they really wanted to take was not available. Not really voluntarily. Suppose they learn about the Cartesian skepticism, not because they're curious, but because they need to pass the test. That's kind of what I meant when I said that the content of the knowledge fulfills an intrinsic purpose of knowledge. Certainly that knowledge has a purpose. They're learning about Cartesian skepticism in order to pass the test, but that kind of purpose doesn't count, right? In order to be epistemically authentic. And so once they learn it, it doesn't satisfy any intrinsic purpose, and so they're apt to forget it. There's nothing epistemically authentic about that. Now, one thing that might be useful from a kind of, again, metacognitive point of view is if there's anything useful about this framework, one of these things is in our curiosity. The ability to become curious is a value, right? That's a really value. So one thing that we can think about as we think about ourselves and also helping other people to know things is, guess what? If you develop that ability to become curious, more stuff is going to be authentic to you. You will know more stuff. And in the long run, your agency will be enhanced and all of that, right? But the ability to cultivate interest, I think, is useful. And that would be fun to talk about. Plug for my colleague, Shawnee Luff's No Cure for Curiosity podcast, which is really good. It's about that, right? And that's why, to quickly go to the last 2 points, that's why I think people will always want to learn. Because people will always want epistemically authentic knowledge. Always. Always. Sometimes people will complain about someone not wanting to learn anything, not being interested, but that same person will spend hours mastering a video game. Hours, right? And my husband is into video games. I know that is no small thing, right? There's a lot to know to become really good at a video game. So it's not that they don't want to know. It's not that they don't want to learn. It's that it's just not authentic to them. So as I was listening to some of the more gloom and doomish, nobody will want to learn anymore. I was thinking, well, no one would say this, right? With the lever. Did anyone say that about the lever? The problem with this contraption is that nobody will want to lift. By the way, this was generated in Bing, that image. Oh, yeah. Now, interestingly enough, I had to work to get this image. Harder than I should have, because Bing doesn't know what a lever is. So eventually, this was my prompt. One caveman lifting a boulder with a lever. That is a piece of wood with a rock as a fulcrum, similar to a teeter top.
Wow.
Right? And that's what they came up with. I mean, it's not great, but it was the best. And I just thought this is close enough, right? Now, but this was a few weeks ago. It might nail it now. Who knows? My claim is, just like levers didn't make us want to not lift anything anymore. It just made us want to lift bigger things better. I think that AI will not make us not want to learn anything anymore. It just might make us want to learn bigger things better. Some of the more metacognitive stuff, some of the more dispositional stuff, some of the interpersonal stuff, right? And here again, they're just really, I mean, I came up with these 4 just meditating in my office. I don't intend this to be a legit, comprehensive list, but agency, self-expression, meaning, curiosity. Look at that, learning to walk, learning to drive, learning to talk, learning to play an instrument, learning to read, formulating theories, and eavesdropping. All of those are just natural things that people do because they're learners. That's just what we are. So my theory is that AI will help us to appreciate the more deep existential purpose of learning and knowing if we allow it to. Right? If we become, I don't want to say we become less defensive, because that presupposes that I'm picking up on a lot of defensive chatter, and I'm picking up on less of it now. Right? I think that was kind of a peak earlier in the semester, I think. This is all evolving so rapidly. But at the beginning of the semester, I was picking up much more kind of penny, the sky is falling, how will we ever assess students? Not so much of that anymore. But okay, so students will always want to learn. We'll always want to learn, but will they want to learn from us? I think so. I think that learning will always be interpersonal. Now, AI might assume some teacherly tasks. This is a good article I read. ChatGTP has entered the classroom, how large language models could transform education. And that led me to go here. Khan Academy now has AI that kind of goes along with it. And generative AI is not another MOOC. A lot of the conversation about MOOCs in particular and online learning struck me as just silly, because now students can learn things on their own. Well, students have always been able to learn things on their own. Long before there were MOOCs, there were like correspondence courses, right? Earn your degree by mail, and they would ship stuff out to the farms, and you would learn things, and you would write the things, you would send back. Always. So that model of there's knowledge, and it shall be distributed to a whole bunch of people. There's nothing new. I would imagine that when the printing press came out, there were similar conversations. Now we won't need teachers anymore, because students can get books and read the stuff. But this is different. This is a different beast, because this is individualized. The thing about the correspondence courses and the MOOCs and the books is that's kind of a one size fits all to instruction. The beauty and the threat, if there is one, to AI is that AI is not that. With AI, you can have a tutor that knows what you're interested in and tailors the examples to your interests, that knows your skill level and tailors the examples to your skill level as it goes up, right? Much more like a tutorial. This is not a MOOC, but MOOC, by the way, because it was massively open online course. What I find interesting is AI copying our stuff here, not the other, right? It's that AI is becoming more human in those interactions. It is becoming individualized and personalized in the instruction. I think that's really interesting. I haven't thought about that very much, but I think that's telling. It means what we like is the personal touch. If we like AI, it's because AI is giving us the personal touch. Interesting. Now, of course, someone could say, yeah, but if AI is giving us the personal touch better than human beings, then we're still out of a job. Aha. But perfectionism is overrated. Fascinating result. I don't know if it's been replicated. I really hope it is, because I want to be able to talk about this result until I die. This article. Our results show the participants liked faulty robots significantly better than the robots in interactive blocks. Is that interesting? That perfection, flawlessness is not, it's not an attractive quality. People want to have a relationship with another being that is not perfect. So I suppose AI could intentionally screw up now and then to increase its likability quotient, like I do, right? For no other reason. Yeah, I think, but I kind of doubt it. I think that there is something about the human touch, the intrinsic fallibility of human beings working with other human beings that is just not gonna go away. Another AI image generated. This one did better because I didn't give it any tricky terms like lever. I just asked robots sitting in university classroom having a conversation with professor and students. Do note, I didn't specify professor, I didn't specify what kind of professor. Look at the kind of professor you got.
Yeah.
Am I outraged about this? Not really, no. If I wanted another kind, I could have asked. I suspect that you know, the bias will eventually fade out a little bit. Professors do look like this, so I think it's fine. I think human teachers. This is my theory, my thesis, if there is one. And again, I would add one little thing, and I'll tell you what I'm going to add. Human teachers can both coach and model the following things, which are closely related to the, in fact, identical with the outcomes that we talked about, right? Thoughtful use of AI, metacognition, values and dispositions, interpersonal skills, the active pursuit of epistemically authentic knowledge. And I would add something like authentic imperfection. There, right? That human beings can model for other human beings how to be human, how to be imperfect but authentic knowers in a world of AI. And I think that is as future-proof as we are going to get. Final call. I do have a library guide that has other things than this, but I have a page in the library guide. It's very underpopulated right now. I'm hoping that won't be underpopulated for very long. Just stuff about AI. So if you find anything that you think would be useful for the good of the whole, send it along. That can be videos, that can be articles, that can be stuff that you create, because we can also put that in our library guides. And one of the things that I dream of doing or having done is eventually having like a little resource repository of things that are created by us for us, how to use AI in our classrooms, right? If you are sending those, send them here. You can send them to my personal email address too, if they go to the same place. But that might be a little bit easier to remember. CTC@USB. That's all I have. Okay, perfect. So there's time for questions.
This is actually just very perfunctory, but would you be willing to share? You had a lot of kind of links to different articles and stuff.
For sure.
Love to share that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And in fact, I should ask Nancy, the other PowerPoints too, will they be in some kind of a repository? So
I really don't know. I haven't asked for them.
Okay, but yeah, I'd be more than happy
So,
to.
yes.
And you can get the better version, the version that I would with the different order. Anything else?
Well, I just want to thank you, because I think you've offered a bit of a, kind of a optimistic, more positive, or given us some reason, I think, for moving away from anxiety and despair.
I think I like it.
Yeah, I haven't actually tried to use it yet.
I like it. And what I really, really, really like about it is sort of the pivot that I think it will, I don't want to say force us to make, I would rather say enable us to make, right? That we can now, we have the luxury of thinking about other things, right? That we've kind of, I think many of us are sort of itching, wanting to do. We just haven't been able to. Yeah.
I have a comment from Carrie Elza.
Oh, hi, Carrie.
Dona, as usual, has both blown my mind and made me feel better about the whole human race.
Carrie is so sweet. Thank you, Carrie. The check.
No, seriously. that perspective was so valuable to hear, and you've given me so much to think about. So thank you.
I don't even know what to look at. I'm looking at the owl. It's probably not.
Just your thoughts on, you know, again, not to sort of like be harping on the negative, but do you see any, I'm just thinking like in terms of kind of writing and, you know, the fact that so if we're talking about, you know, kind of, all right, we'll move away from papers to presentations or, you know, let them create part of their paper from, you know, AI. I guess I still, even though I definitely, I resonate a lot with what you said, and I think I can, but I guess, and I don't want to be a Luddite, but I also, there's part of me that still kind of feels like the act of writing, the act of thinking through a paper,
Yes.
you know, it forces you to develop those thinking skills, to develop your ideas in a way, and it's like, I guess I still, you know, I'm still not 100% convinced that we're not going to lose something. But
Well, I think, because I thought the same thing, and I think the same thing. I totally agree with you. But what I take that to mean is not that we don't assign writing anymore, but that we assign writing being very explicit about why we're assigned writing, right? Because people know that. We have some real live students in the room. We don't need to talk about them as if they aren't here. Have you not experienced that? When you write something, you understand it better.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. So if the idea is I'm assigning you this paper so you understand this, and there is some reason you have to understand this, I think people will write the paper. Now, will there be external pressures to cheat?
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Right? Because people are overworked and stressed and pressured, and there's this need to be perfect. But that's another talk altogether, right?
Yeah, I just to piggyback on that. I mean, when I often see the suggestion move from essays to presentation, and that does bother me. There's so many students who don't have basic writing skills. They don't learn them in their freshman and sophomore year. They're gonna have to ask AI to write them every single email they're ever gonna write.
Yeah.
So there'll be a glass ceiling in the world that they'll never get over.
Although I was an early beneficiary of AI in ways that I hadn't really thought of. I am naturally an atrocious speller. I'm really bad at it. And in fact, I have stories that would make you cry because they make me cry about when I was in elementary school and you know, needing to pass those stupid spelling tests, which I never could do. And it was not because I didn't try. I tried. When did I get better at spelling? When Word started to
Right. But I have students that don't even have the knowledge that they should be using a spell checker. I mean, we've got some basic problems. So I'm not saying, you're not saying that, but I'm just saying, I think we just have to keep teaching writing in the humanities and social sciences.
Absolutely.
And we have to shift it so that prompts are very specific.
We have to teach writing because writing is intrinsically important, but also because I think primarily because you think better if you can write, right?
Exactly.
It's a way to articulate a point to oneself.
But that goes with your idea of epistemic authenticity. That is real. When you realize that it's your agency on the line,
Exactly.
because understanding something better would allow you to express what you really want better. Ultimately, that's when students, I feel, when they understand that, then the time needed to create something is worth their time and effort, right? But very often, I think also asking how much to write versus that they write, right? So 3 papers, is it too much? Or they learn from 1 paper, but if they do it really well, Because I know when first time I got my publication, I think I had 20 drafts,
Oh, gosh, yes.
if not even more, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's no longer about writing, but every time I rewrote, it was better. And even when I got comments first and they said, no, it's not good enough, rewrite. And then I cried and then I rewrote it and I'm like, wow, it's so much better. So I think, right, but realizing what are we doing this for?
What are we doing?
To pass the knowledge, but if the knowledge is easily available, then are we doing it
Mhm.
for the right
But
reason?
even like the PowerPoint, the list where, you know, there's the consensus building versus non-consensus building was one bullet point. Then I had the schema versus elements, fact versus theory. Then I had opinion, fact versus opinion.
Yeah.
Now, these are bullet points, but it was when I was looking at it half an hour ago, I thought, why is that bullet point there? This should be switched. And as soon as I saw that, I was able to see connections that I had not been able to see before. That there's a deep connection between this bullet point and this one that is obscured by having this thing in between. Now that is a writing skill, right? What do you say in what order and how do you say it? That is very much tied to the epistemic, the authentic epistemic goal, I think, of like meaning. I like seeing connections between things. Writing helps me to see connections between things. And I don't think I am unique among humans as wanting to see connections between things. So I think that, you know, writing, that skill set is certainly not going to go away. How we approach it, how people show that they have it, might do. But absolutely else. I mean, writing, yes, writing is important, always will be important. Thank you.
And I think writing, yes, is important, absolutely, that's because we can use AI as well, right? AI, draft this paper on this, and the student turns that in, and you have the student revise that.
Yeah.
And add in course materials or course context or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
So AI produces a draft, or they put their draft into AI, and AI becomes a peer reviewer.
Right.
And they turn in all of those steps, and then you can also, instead of a presentation, you can get a defense of their paper. Okay, you wrote this paper. Now, I have a copy, everybody has a copy. Now, tell us what you're thinking as you wrote this paper, right? So there's a lot of ways you can utilize AI to perhaps be a peer reviewer or be an initial content generator, right?
Yeah.
Then the student edits. Now, is that true full writing process from start to finish? No. Right? But it could teach AI skills that could then employ in other activities.
Right.
In the course.
And it can generate, it can generate massive amounts of text for revision, right? Really quickly.
Sure.
I had the honor of giving a one class to some entering students in August. And are you all familiar with I think is it Vanderbilt, the Peabody Education School at Vanderbilt? The controversy where the dean's office used AI to write the letter to the students about a shooting that occurred in Michigan State. So I just thought, I'm just curious. Yeah, it's pretty egregious. Well, I don't know what.
Why is it egregious?
Exactly. See, that's it. Because my first reaction is this is egregious. My second reaction was, well, Hallmark cards are rewritten. Yeah.
One thing that I think AI could be very helpful for with regard to student writing is getting over that fear that is caused by continued lack of success that many students have had with writing. If you start with an AI draft, you kind of have it built in that there is some success there to build from rather than staring at the blank paper, fearing that you're going to sink.
But that's true. But what I found interesting is I gave these students, I taught that I didn't say anything, not one word about the origin of the text. I found it online and it had in the bottom, you know, the office was transparent. This was generated by, or, you know, inspired by, or we used AI, ChatGTP to generate this. So I just printed it out and I handed it and I said, read this and tell me what you think. Wanting to know how many of them are going to say, what the heck? You know, ChatGPT. No, some did, but the majority were about, this is really poorly written. This is very general. This is very pablum. This is using a lot of words to say nothing. And then somebody said, ChatGTP, and then the room exploded, right? But what I found interesting was they thought, they were very critical of that writing. Now, would it do a better job now? Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I don't know if I could have done a better job. I think a lot of those emails are kind of necessity. Because you have to walk such a very fine line. You can't say anything that might offend anybody. You're always going to have kind of a superficiality to that language.
Well, but I think my objection to that is that, this is like a moment of a traumatic moment for the community.
Oh, exactly.
Right,
Oh, exactly.
and so that somebody would, instead of an administrator, instead of sort of speaking from the heart to their community would.
And irony, the really, truly delicious irony
Yeah.
was that the content talked about the importance of human relationships. And
Wow.
there were just levels to this thing that had my heart bleed. I still, when I talk about it, I can feel in the pit of my stomach, deep sympathy for the people in that office. Right, deep.
No, it's such a nice person. I'm just chuckling. He got caught. Fools.
I mean, oh my goodness, I didn't do that. I haven't done anything like that. But can you imagine to be made, to be held up to public ridicule and pretty much, that's just, oh, awful.
Well, these two examples together are very interesting. That the students were angry or upset that you had fed them a artificial intelligence generated thing, and the outrage that the letter of condolence. It's like people expect to have a human being communicating with them. And when it's not a human being and you don't know it's not a human being, you're being lied to. And I see this as another important reason to continue to double down on writing skills and research skills, so that our students will be empowered to spot artificial intelligence and be able to discern what is artificial intelligence and what is not.
Right, because
I mean, at this point, ChatGPT is just completely transparent. I mean, you can spot it in a second. I mean, it's all this, says a lot of fancy stuff with correct sentences and says nothing. I mean, it's really generic.
I've read some stuff that's obviously chat and some stuff that's not. Yeah.
Paid version.
That'll change, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Write it in the style of a student, but they don't know how to do that either.
Regarding epistemic authenticity, and like specifically the first one, how do we actually know that someone's voluntarily pursuing knowledge?
Don't.
Okay.
And you can't, no, and you can't. I also don't think you could know that the motivations for pursuing.
Right, because I was gonna ask, like, it seems like people are voluntarily pursuing school, they're paying a lot of money for it, building their debt for it, but obviously there's people who are reluctant to do that anyway.
And I wonder that, because there's levels of granularity to the voluntariness, right?
Right.
Or like, you might be voluntarily in the university, but does that mean you're voluntarily learning each piece of knowledge that you get? For reasons that are intrinsic to that knowledge, not because you need to memorize it to pass the test to get the grade, right? Not that kind of purely instrumental. And that would be an interesting thing to tease out. That's a really good point. But no, you couldn't know any of that, right? I can't know if why someone is, if they're pursuing it voluntarily, what their motives are. I think what that notion might be useful to give people as just try to have your knowledge be authentic, if at all possible, because it will make your life better, right? And here's how you can do it. You can't have all the levers in control, but certainly developing the ability to become curious is one that can be. That's something that you can learn.
Yeah, kind of in connection with like the writing and like the importance of writing, like. Students understanding that writing is important can only be like that, like they have to discover that for themselves.
Right.
But I also think like through using AI to like shortcut other more superfluous knowledge, you could like through a system-wide change in education help enable like teachers to be able to make that point to students earlier on.
Yeah.
So they can come to college and be able to know how to write already because they already understand the importance of writing. If they're not bogged down with memorizing states and capitals.
Right.
But
Well,
this is my big fear, is that the invention of AI will reinforce the idea that writing isn't important. I feel like everybody understands if you want to get good at a sport, you have to practice it and your muscles will get better and you'll get the body knowledge. But people don't understand that practice makes your mind stronger. They don't understand. And they think either I'm just not a good writer.
Right.
You know, I'm not very smart. I mean, there's this fatalism about the mind that doesn't apply to when people think about athletics or the body.
Right,
Or
that's,
the absence of a growth
Right.
mentality.
It's like,
yeah, the
that's not
absence.
new.
That's not new. I mean,
Yeah, that's not
I
new.
remember thinking that the first time I ever taught a writing class is that people didn't understand that you don't, I learned how to write now, I've written a sentence, I'm done. You know, that no one's ever thought about writing that way in my experience.
My
So-
fear is that problem is going to be exasperated greatly by the advent of.
Yeah, but just being
programs.
able to look something up on Google is not the same as, I don't think that people equate that with knowledge. Some people might, but they always might have done that, like looking up something in a dictionary. I mean, I think it's not as, just because the tool is there doesn't mean that everyone is gonna think that way. And I think that's kind of what Dona was saying. It makes me feel better to think that too. So-
Sorry, I'm being pessimistic, but when Dona and I talk, I'm always the pessimist.
But I wonder if again, that authenticity is the saving grace, because when we write condolences, right? The reason they are meaningful, because we know that they're meaningful to us, and when we say, I hope that the person who sees my name under that message thinks that I really thought this way.
Right.
Even if I have used the formulaic sentence, right, to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that only is if we have interpersonal relationship, right?
Yeah.
And when students write in class, when they read their writing, when they talk about like, well, the reason I chose this title because I thought about this title and that title, right? Like, when you go through the process, it's just freeing the time during the class time to actually ask this. But then we have to rethink again, what are our learning outcomes?
Right.
In
all
order
about the
to
learning
give
outcomes.
space.
It's
to
all about the
practice
learning
that.
outcomes. It really is. It's all about the learning. Well, it is 5 o'clock. And I have to. I mean, contrary to this clock.
Yes.
Ironic, isn't it? I mean, a talk about AI and our analog.
Does not work, yeah.